Let's talk about terpenes and terpene profiles that we can find in cannabis products. So this section will familiarize ourselves with common terpenes that we'll find in the cannabis plant, and we'll start to understand various terpene profiles and how that affects the medicinal quality of the product that you're taking. So terpenes are the aromatic parts that make up all plants. So not just the smell of a rose has terpenes in it, or the smell of lavender, but the smell of apple. So everything, smells are made up of terpenes. And some people started talking about terpenes as being the essential oils of the plant, and that's not quite right, because essential oils are actually made up of a whole bunch of different terpenes in different combinations. Terpenes have a physiological action within the body. So when we're taking cannabis products, not just the cannabinoids that we'll learn about, also the terpenes, or the smell of the plants, will have a different effect in the body. And we'll learn about a lot of those as we're going through this lesson. The terpenes actually develop in the glandular portion of the plant. So in the same place where the cannabinoids will start to develop as well, in those little kind of sticky parts that we learned about in the plant. You don't need a lot of terpenes in order to have a physiological effect. So if I say the word lemon to you right now, a lot of people will start to salivate just at the thought of the word lemon. So we didn't have to smell the lemon, but if you smelt just a tiny hint of a lemon, you would probably start to salivate as well. So these are very powerful chemicals, and they don't have to be in high concentrations for them to have a physiological effect. The food industry right now uses terpenes to put flavor into different foods and to enhance the flavors. So it's almost like sort of boosting up a natural flavor. So a banana flavor might have some different terpenes in there to make the flavor that banana flavor much more prominent. Another way that terpenes are used is to get us addicted to food. So there's a book out that's called The Dorito Effect, and it's a really interesting book. It's a few years old now, but if you wanted to go look that up, it's called The Dorito Effect. And he talks about how the smell of food that is ripe, that gets to ripe in the ground or ripen on the tree, they have much better terpenes in them, and the terpenes have that physiological effect on our body and make that food much more satisfying. So there's a whole science around terpenes, and they're coming into prominence now because of the cannabis industry, because it makes such a difference in the products that you're using. So as we talked about, terpenes will develop in the resinous heads of the trichome glands within the cannabis. The concentrations of terpenes in even the same species, or the same cultivar of a plant, will vary again based on the amount of sunlight that they get, the soil conditions, how it's watered, humidity, when it's harvested, those kinds of things. So they can vary from batch to batch as well, just based on different growing conditions. As the plant grows, those terpenes are constantly being produced, but they are volatile, so they will evaporate off. So that's why when you're drying and curing your cannabis plant, it's really important that it's done in the right humidity so you don't lose a lot of those terpenes. In the manufacturing process, as we turn our cannabis into different products like oils and those kinds of things, we might lose some of those terpenes along the way as well. If your product has been cold pasteurized, and another name for cold pasteurization is irradiation, we will lose some of the terpenes. Some of those terpenes will be destroyed. Cold pasteurization is a great way to get rid of any kind of mold or other pathogens within your cannabis, and that becomes really important for people who are using that product that might be immune compromised. And so inhaling or ingesting a little bit of mold can really set them off and have a negative effect on them. So some manufacturers, if there's a little bit of mold detected in their product, they're going to do a cold pasteurization. So it doesn't really affect the quality of the cannabis that much, but you will lose a little bit of your terpene content from that. Also, if your product is improperly stored, you're going to lose some of your terpene content from that as well. So that's why it's really important that you keep your product in preferably a glass bottle that is tightly sealed, and keep it out of sunlight, keep it in a cupboard where it's not exposed to light, and not too hot, as well as a good way to store your product. As a grower, you can increase the terpene content based on different types of light that you use, the type of nutrients that you put into the soil. That's really important. Some growers say that they use that wide spectrum of light, or UVB light, 2 to 3 weeks during the flowering stage. Some people like to remove some of the unnecessary leaves as those buds are starting up. And having a reduced nighttime temperature is really important as well, so that there's quite a variance between your nighttime temperature and your daytime temperature, and that helps for those aromatic qualities of the plant to form a little bit better. Flushing also helps to either preserve or enhance the terpene content. So flushing is just basically not putting any nutrients in the soil for usually the last 2 to 3 weeks before you harvest. And you want to harvest at the optimal time. And that takes some skill and some guidance in learning when's the right time to harvest your flowering tops, so that they are in top condition and have at the peak of their terpene content. And then the drying process again needs to happen. A slow dry temperature, a slow dry over 2 to 3 weeks at a cool temperature with about 50% humidity. That's kind of the best consensus for getting the best terpene content out of your products, or at least not losing what was there to begin with. So terpenes really, when we're looking at the terpene content of a cannabis product, they're most relevant in your dry herb or your dry flower. That's where all the terpene content is mostly intact. It's exactly how it, as long as it was properly cured and dried and processed, most of that terpene content should be intact. That's why we get that kind of different smells for cannabis products. So if you walk into a retail store, a lot of them will have like these little containers that will have a bud in them, and then there's a little flap that you can lift up and you can smell it, and you'll notice that each strain or cultivar might have a slightly different smell to it. And a lot of people base their product choice based on the smell. And some of it, quite frankly, smells like musty old socks, and some of it smells really quite delicious. Cannabis is quite a smelly plant, and it's kind of known for its kind of skunky smell as well. But as you start to learn about these terpenes and you work with different products, you'll be able to start to discern the difference in the different terpene content. Most licensed producers these days will test for some of the top terpenes that are in their products. It's not mandated, it's not a law that they test for the terpenes, but I think manufacturers who do that with their products, I think it makes for easier for the consumer to choose what products they want to buy. I know when I'm choosing products, I do look at the terpene content, because there's some terpenes that actually really wake me up, and I don't want those in my product that I'm going to use for sleeping. When we have oil extracts from the manufacturers, they may or may not have terpene content in them. Now, you can phone the manufacturer up and say, hey, does your CBD oil have any terpenes? And they say, well, it might have a little bit left, but it was, we removed them before we made the oil. They may have removed the terpenes, or they may have just been destroyed in the extraction process. Some manufacturers will remove those terpenes, extract the cannabinoid content, create the oil, and then add the terpenes back into the oil. So then there is some smell to them. Others won't do that at all. They'll just remove it and then just sell the product without terpenes. So again, it may or may not be disclosed on the website, so it might take a phone call especially if you're using working with oil products. It might take a phone call or an email to the manufacturer to find out if there are any terpene content in their oil or extracts. Knowing your terpene profile makes for a better ability to choose your product. So if you are helping other people choose their product for medicinal reasons, if you're an educator, or if you're just for personal reasons, it's a really great idea for you to start to kind of understand how the different terpenes affect you personally. Now, some of these effects are quite universal, but they may or may not work, because some people really like that skunky smell of cannabis. They find it really relaxing, and other people, they smell that skunky smell and they go like, I don't want that at all. Often, not often, but we do get clients or patients in the clinic who will say, like, is there another oil that doesn't have a smell to it, because they can't swallow the oil because of the smell of it, just doesn't work for them. Smell and taste are really interlinked as well, and so we have to keep that in mind when we're helping people choose products as well. If they're very sensitive to different tastes and smells, some products might not work really well for them. So understanding the terpene profile of various products, and also understanding what those terpenes mean and the effects that they have on the body. Those are really good skills to have that will really help you with product selection, especially if you're helping someone as a cannabis educator. So for example, a product that's really high in myrcene and low in limonene might be a good strain to help with sleep. And that's out of my own experience. If there's a little bit of limonene in a product, I find that it will wake me up for an hour or two before it actually puts me to sleep. The myrcene takes over and puts me to sleep. So we'll learn a little bit more about that as we go along through this section. So as I said, licensed producers, they're not obligated. It is not the law that they have to disclose their terpene content, but I think most manufacturers now are starting to understand that it gives the consumers a lot more information when they're choosing their product. It also is going to cut down on phone calls and emails to the manufacturer, say, hey, what's your terpene profile of this product or that product? So they'll put them up on their website in various ways. And you can see on this, there's just two examples here of how the terpene content is shown. The one that's the circle there, what we have with that is it doesn't actually tell you how much of each terpene is in that product or the percentage of the terpene, but what it does do is it compares them. So on the example that we have here, we'll see that myrcene is very predominant in this particular strain, and then the next predominant terpene is caryophyllene, and it's got a little bit of limonene and a very small amount of pinene in there as well. So that's not really showing you what the percentage of those are, but it's just comparing the top 4 or 5 terpenes to each other, so you can see what's most prominent in there. On the other one with the pink bars in it, it actually gives you a percent, and you can see that percent in this particular product. The caryophyllene percent is only 0.2%. That's a very small amount, but it has a big physiological action within the body. And even when we get down to the humulin, which is only 0.06%, that one is still going to have some physiological effects. For this one, with that caryophyllene being sort of like the high terpene content in there at 0.2%, that's very muscle relaxing. It's a calming kind of a herb. Humulin is known to help with appetite suppression. So, these are ways that you can start to help to narrow down your choices of your product based on terpene profiles. Some people like to think of the terpene profiles is like turning a dial on an old-fashioned radio that has the dial that you kind of tune it in, and it's kind of like, woo, 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 right, until you can actually hone in on the signal coming out, and that's what the terpenes can do for us when we're choosing product. So let's look at some of the common terpenes that we're going to find in the cannabis plant. There's several hundred known terpenes to be found in different cannabis plants and products. As far as how many terpenes there are in the world, thousands, probably millions of them. So there's a lot of these little molecules that make up smells. So I'm going to present a few in the 12 of the most common ones. They're going to be presented in alphabetical order. So if you need to go back and kind of review some of this, you just know that these are coming up in alphabetical order as well. So let's start with alpha caryophyllene, or it's often just called caryophyllene. I've also heard it pronounced caryophyllene as well. I don't know which one is correct. I hear them used interchangeably. I usually just say caryophyllene. I have a colleague that always calls it caryophyllene, so you choose. So this is kind of a woody, spicy, almost a sweet kind of smell, a little bit of hint of a clove smell in there as well. This is the only known terpene that actually interacts with the endocannabinoid system. So there's actually some debate whether caryophyllene is a cannabinoid or whether it's a terpene. So there's still some debate that will get hashed out over the next few years. In any case, it has a very strong anti-inflammatory action. So if you're looking to help someone that has a lot of inflammation in their body that they need to bring down, inflammation can cause pain. So this would be one that will help bring down pain in the body. And it also has the analgesic, which is an actual pain reliever, but it's really relieving pain by bringing down inflammation. It's also anxiolytic, which just means it's anti-anxiety. Neuroprotective, so there are some studies out there that show that caryophyllene will slow down damage to the brain and the nervous system. And so it can be used in places like people with concussions, those kinds of things where there might be some damage to the brain. Caryophyllene might be quite helpful in those areas. Mildly anti-malarial. Now in Canada, we don't really need to worry about malaria too much, but there are parts of the world where malaria is a big issue. And so caryophyllene can help with that as well. There are better botanicals that can help with, that are anti-malarial, but it's just been studied for that, so we put that in there. So all of these terpenes are going to show up in a lot of different plants. And so I've listed on each of these just some of the other plants where you will find this particular terpene. In this one, we find it in basil, in a bay, like a bay leaf, in black pepper and other peppers as well. Caraway, cinnamon, cloves, hops, and rosemary all have this one chemical that make up their smells. Now, if we look at each of those plants and you think about what they smell like, some of those smells are really quite different from each other. So it's just the combination of terpenes that go together that give very distinctive smells to different plants. Our next one we'll look at is borneol. This is quite a pungent, kind of an earthy, minty aroma, or that kind of more strong, almost minty smell of camphor. This is a great analgesic, really good at pain relief. It's antibacterial, also anti-inflammatory, not as strong as the caryophyllene, but it does have anti-inflammatory properties. And anxiolytic, again, helps with anxiety as well. We also find borneol in sage, rosemary, pine, and valerian. If you know what a valerian root smells like, it's a really stinky kind of a smell, but that's also has borneol in it as well. So that's where that pungentness comes from. Eucalyptol, well, if you even just look at the name, you can probably guess another plant where we find eucalyptol, which is in the eucalyptus tree. And eucalyptus is very distinctive. It's a very distinctive smell. Antifungal, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. We often use eucalyptus oil if someone is sick, so we'll use it as a diffuser in a room where someone is sick, just to help keep the bacteria down in that room, in a sick room. We also find this in rosemary, sage, in the tea tree plant, and in wormwood. So again, tea tree has a very distinctive smell. Also, wormwood has that very distinctive smell as well. It's kind of a pungent, sagey, almost an off kind of a smell. But if you've ever smelled eucalyptus, then you will know what eucalyptol smells like, because that is the predominant terpene in eucalyptus. Geraniol. This is a very florally, kind of sweet, fresh kind of a scent. It's known for being antioxidant, so it really helps boost the immune system. We find that in Monarda, and Monarda, the other name for Monarda is bee balm. They're a beautiful kind of purpley pink flower that the bees really love. And the Monarda flower also has very good antioxidant and antimicrobial properties as well. As a herbalist, we'll use that for people who have colds and flus, those kinds of things. Black tea, basil, catmint, frankincense, a grapevine. Did you know that grapevines had a distinctive smell? And thyme as well. So you probably know the smell. Black tea has quite a distinctive smell. If you've ever smelled frankincense, again, very distinctive smell. And we'll find geraniol in all of those ones. Humulin. Humulin is the distinctive smell of the hops plant. And if you remember, we talked about earlier that humulin or hops and cannabis are actually related. They're in the same genre, the same family, so they're kind of cousin plants to each other. Humulin is a very spicy, earthy, woody kind of a smell. It's little hints of flower in there, but it's very similar to what the actual smell of hops is. So if you've ever smelled hops, hoppy beer like IPAs that have a lot of hops in them has quite a distinctive smell. So you probably are familiar with that smell. This is a great pain reliever. It's antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and this is the one known as an anorectic. So it's an appetite stimulant, and it helps to it's an appetite suppressant, and it helps to promote weight loss because it will kind of suppress your appetite. You're not hungry anymore. I always with this one, I like to use the example of if you go out for dinner with friends and you drink a really hoppy beer before you eat your dinner, you might not be as hungry anymore. Now, obviously beer has a lot of calories in it, so it's just filling you up with calories, but the hops actually are going to decrease your appetite. So if you're going out for a dinner where you really want to splurge and eat a lot of really delicious food, don't drink a hoppy beer first. Other plants where you find this is ginseng and sage as well.